Damon Ashford stood frozen in the marble doorway of his penthouse bedroom, his $15,000 suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. The woman he'd loved for 8 years, his wife Celeste, was tangled in silk sheets with Marcus Thorne, Damon's college roommate and CFO. Not a business partner. Not a stranger. His best friend. The betrayal didn't hit like a punch. It arrived like poison, slow and suffocating. Celeste's laugh, the one he'd memorized during late nights in his startup office, now felt like broken glass in his chest. She didn't even look ashamed. She looked annoyed that he'd come home early from Singapore. Before we continue, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let me tell you what will shock you. Marcus scrambled for his pants, but Celeste stayed perfectly still, her emerald eyes cold as January rain. Damon, she said flatly, not even bothering to cover herself. This isn't what you think. The sentence hung in the air like spoiled perfume. Damon's hands trembled, but his face remained carved from stone. A skill he'd learned from building a tech empire worth $4.2 billion, while everyone underestimated the quiet kid from Detroit. He'd survived boardroom coups, hostile takeovers, and his father's deathbed disappointment. But this was different. This was surgical. How long? His voice came out steady, terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that precedes hurricanes. Celeste finally reached for the robe, her movements lazy and titled. Does it matter? She asked, tilting her head like she was discussing dinner reservations. Marcus had gone pale, backing toward the window as if he could disappear into the Manhattan skyline 30 floors below. Damon's gaze never left Celeste. How long? Each word dropped like a judge's gavel. She sighed, theatrical and bored. 2 years, Damon. Maybe 3. You were always too busy building your little empire to notice. Little Empire. The company that gave her the penthouse, the black Amex, the summers in Santorini. Damon's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Get out, he said quietly. Both of you. Now. Celeste laughed, actually laughed, sliding off the bed like she had all the time in the world. You're not serious. This is my home too, Damon. New York is a no-fault divorce state. I'm entitled to half of everything you have. She stepped closer, her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the one he bought her in Paris, now smelling like betrayal. So unless you want this messy, I suggest you calm down and we talk like adults. Damon looked at her, really looked, and realized he was staring at a stranger wearing his wife's face. The girl who'd loved him when he had nothing, who'd eaten ramen in his studio apartment while he coded until dawn, was gone. Or maybe she'd never existed. You're right, he said softly, stepping aside to let them leave. We should talk. My lawyers will be in touch Monday morning. As they dressed and walked past him, Marcus couldn't meet his eyes. But Celeste paused at the door, her smile sharp as a blade. Good luck proving anything, darling. You've been too busy to even know what day it is. The door clicked shut, and Damon Ashford began to plan. The coffee shop in Brooklyn smelled like burnt espresso and hope. Damon sat in the corner booth with his third-hand laptop, debugging code for the 72nd time that week. He was 24, broke, and surviving on protein bars and stubbornness. His Stanford degree hadn't impressed the venture capitalists who'd laughed him out of their glass offices. Too ambitious, they'd said. Too risky. So he'd moved to New York with $800 and a dream that everyone called delusional. The app he was building, CoreLink, would revolutionize data security for small businesses. If he could just make it work. You're here again. The voice was warm, teasing. Damon looked up to see a woman with paint-stained fingers and eyes the color of deep forest. She wore a vintage band t-shirt and ripped jeans, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun. I work here, she continued, setting down a fresh coffee he hadn't ordered. And you've been staring at that screen for 6 hours. Blink, please. It's disturbing. Damon blinked deliberately, and she laughed, a sound like wind chimes in summer. I'm Celeste, she said, sliding into the seat across from him uninvited. Artist, barista, professional wanderer. And you're the tech monk who never sleeps. They talked until the cafe closed. Celeste was a painter who'd dropped out of Parsons to find real inspiration, which meant she was broke too, living in a 4th-floor walk-up in Bushwick with 2 roommates and a cat named Hemingway. She painted cityscapes at dawn and served coffee to pay for canvas. Damon told her about CoreLink, about the investors who'd rejected him 15 times, about his father who'd wanted him to be a doctor. "Screw them," Celeste said, her intensity sudden and fierce. "You're building something that matters. That's worth more than their approval." Something in Damon's chest cracked open. Nobody had believed in him like that. Not even himself some days. They became inseparable. Celeste would bring him food during all-night coding sessions, painting in the corner of his studio apartment while he worked. She never complained about the cramped space or the lack of money. When Damon landed his first client, a dental practice in Queens paying $3,000 for custom security software, they celebrated with dollar pizza and cheap wine on his fire escape. "When you make your first $1 million," Celeste whispered against his shoulder as the city lights blinked below them, "don't forget this moment. Don't forget being hungry and happy." Damon kissed her paint-stained hands. "I could never forget you," he promised. 2 years later, CoreLink went viral. A Forbes article called it the small business security revolution. Venture capital firms that had rejected Damon now flooded his inbox with offers. He sold 30% of the company for $50 million and married Celeste in a small ceremony in Central Park. She wore a vintage lace dress from a thrift store and wildflowers in her hair. "I don't need a big wedding," she'd said. "I just need you." Damon believed her. He built her a studio in their first real apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the East River. She painted less and less as his company grew, but he told himself she was happy. He told himself love was enough. The Manhattan penthouse had 40-foot ceilings and a view that made visitors gasp. Damon barely noticed it anymore. He was working 18-hour days, scaling CoreLink into a full enterprise platform, fighting off acquisition offers from Amazon and Microsoft. At 32, he'd made the Forbes 400. Celeste was photographed at charity galas in designer gowns, her artist days a charming origin story she told at cocktail parties. "I used to paint," she'd laugh to socialites, "but now I'm Damon's muse." He'd watch her from across the room and feel something hollow opening inside his chest. But success was supposed to feel like this, wasn't it? Empty at the edges? Marcus Thorne joined CoreLink as CFO when the company hit $500 million in valuation. He and Damon had been roommates at Stanford. Marcus was the one who'd convinced him to pursue tech instead of his father's medical dynasty. "You're a terrible doctor but a brilliant coder," Marcus had joked. They'd stayed close through the years, even when Marcus took the safer route with Goldman Sachs while Damon was eating ramen and gambling everything on code. Now Marcus was divorced, lonely, and looking for purpose. "I want to build something that matters," he'd told Damon over scotch. "Not just shuffle rich people's money." Damon hired him on the spot. It was the decision that would destroy everything. Celeste loved having Marcus around. "It's like having the old days back," she said brightly, planning dinner parties where they'd reminisce about Stanford parties and youthful mistakes. Damon noticed how her laugh changed around Marcus. Louder, freer, the way it used to sound when it was just the two of them in Brooklyn. He dismissed the observation. Marcus was his best friend. Celeste was his wife. The math of loyalty seemed simple. But math didn't account for the way Celeste started working out at 5 a.m., or how she'd started wearing perfume to run errands, or the new lingerie hidden in her drawer that he'd never seen her wear. One Tuesday evening, Damon came home to find Celeste and Marcus sharing wine in the living room, her hand resting casually on his arm. They jumped apart when they heard the door, but not quickly enough. "Damon." Celeste's smile was too bright. "Marcus was just telling me about the Tokyo expansion. It sounds amazing." Marcus stood, straightening his tie. "I should go," he said, not meeting Damon's eyes. Something cold settled in Damon's stomach. "Stay for dinner," he heard himself say, testing them. "We have plenty." The meal was torture. Celeste talked too much. Marcus drank too much. And Damon watched them both with the same analytical mind that had built a billion-dollar company. That night, after Marcus left and Celeste fell asleep, Damon sat in his office watching security footage from their building. He told himself he was being paranoid, controlling, everything he'd promised never to become. But the footage showed Marcus entering their building 7 times in the past 2 weeks, always when Damon was traveling, always staying for hours. Damon closed the laptop and stared out at the glittering city he'd conquered. He'd built an empire, but missed the invasion happening in his own home. The irony tasted like ashes. He didn't confront Celeste. Not yet. He needed to be sure. He needed evidence. Because Damon Ashford didn't make moves without data. Damon hired a private investigator named Elena Voss, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate espionage and infidelity cases. She was professional, discreet, and expensive. "I don't do this for the drama," Elena told him in her sparse office in Chelsea. "I do it because people deserve the truth, even when it destroys them." Damon nodded, his hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "I need to know everything. Photos, timelines, messages. Everything." Elena studied him with sharp gray eyes. "Mr. Ashford, in my experience, clients who ask for everything usually regret getting it." "Are you sure?" He met her gaze without flinching. "I'm sure." The first report arrived via encrypted email 3 days later. Photos of Celeste and Marcus at a boutique hotel in Soho, the kind with no cameras and staff trained to forget faces. They'd checked in at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday when Damon was in London closing a deal with a European telecom company. Elena's notes were clinical. Subjects arrived separately. Stayed 4 hours. Physical contact observed in lobby, hand-holding, intimate proximity. Female subject appeared relaxed, laughing. Damon stared at the grainy photos until they blurred. Celeste wore the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary. She was smiling wider than she'd smiled at him in months. He kept working, kept smiling at board meetings, kept sleeping beside Celeste and pretending everything was fine. It was the hardest performance of his life. She'd ask about his day, and he'd answer while thinking about the hotel receipts Elena had uncovered. 16 visits over 8 months. She'd kiss him goodbye at the door, and he'd remember the text message Elena had recovered from Marcus's cloud backup. "He'll never leave you, and I'll never stop wanting you. We're trapped in the best way." Damon's rage lived in his bones now, cold and patient. He'd learned patience building Corelink. He could wait. The breaking point came on their 8th anniversary. Damon had planned dinner at the restaurant where he'd proposed. A quiet Italian place in the West Village with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Celeste seemed distracted through the appetizers, checking her phone every few minutes. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Gallery emergency. You know how artists are, temperamental." Damon knew she'd closed her gallery 3 months ago. Elena had confirmed it. The gallery was their code word now. "Of course," he said gently, refilling her wine. "How's the Morrison piece coming?" She froze for half a second. There was no Morrison piece, then recovered. Slowly. Very slowly. They made love that night in their ridiculous bed with its 1,000 thread-count sheets, and Damon felt like he was sleeping with a ghost. Afterward, while Celeste showered, he checked her phone using the passcode she didn't know he knew. The messages with Marcus were careful now, coded. But he found one from earlier that day. "Tonight was perfect. I wish we didn't have to hide." Followed by Marcus's response, "Soon. Be patient. Once the Singapore deal closes, everything changes." Damon's blood went cold. The Singapore deal was worth $800 million. It would make him one of the 50 richest people in America. And they were waiting for it, planning something. He put the phone back exactly where he'd found it, his hands steady as steel. They wanted to wait for Singapore? Fine. So would he. Damon accelerated the Singapore timeline. He told the board he wanted the deal closed in 3 weeks instead of 3 months. "Push harder," he instructed Marcus in their Monday executive meeting. "I want this done. Whatever it takes." Marcus looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Damon, are you sure? Rushing this could cost us leverage." Damon smiled. The smile that had charmed investors out of hundreds of millions. "I trust you, Marcus. You've never let me down." The words landed like grenades. Marcus actually flinched. Good. Let him squirm. Let them both think they were winning while Damon built the cage around them. He hired a second investigator, a tech specialist who could access phone records, deleted messages, cloud backups. The data came back worse than he'd imagined. Celeste and Marcus had been planning for months. Not just an affair. An exit strategy. Messages revealed that Celeste had consulted 3 different divorce attorneys, shopping for the one who'd be most aggressive. "I want half of everything," she'd written to her lawyer. The prenup was signed when the company was worth nothing. "I've been his partner through all of this. I deserve my share." Marcus's messages were even colder. "Once he's distracted with Singapore, we move. You file. I'll have already liquidated my options and disappeared the money offshore. By the time his lawyers figure it out, we'll be in Monaco." Monaco. They were going to take his money and run to Monaco. Damon sat in his office at 3 a.m., the city spread out below him like a circuit board, and felt something settle in his chest. Not rage anymore. Clarity. They'd mistaken his love for weakness. His kindness for stupidity. They'd forgotten he'd built this empire from nothing because he was smarter, more ruthless, and more patient than anyone who'd underestimated him. He opened his laptop and began to work. Not on CoreLink. On something else. Something that would teach them both exactly who they'd betrayed. First, he called Elena. I need you to expand the surveillance. I want every movement, every transaction, every breath documented for the next 3 weeks. Elena's voice was cautious. Mr. Ashford, what exactly are you planning? Damon's voice was arctic. Justice, Ms. Voss. I'm planning justice. Next, he called his attorney. Not the corporate lawyers who handled his deals, but Gregory Chun, a bulldog litigator known for destroying opponents in divorce court. Gregory listened to the entire story without interruption. Then he laughed. Not kindly. They have no idea what's coming, do they? Damon smiled into the darkness. None whatsoever. The final piece was the most delicate. Damon needed to catch them in the act, not just for the satisfaction, but for the legal leverage. New York might be a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity still mattered in asset division when you could prove malicious intent and conspiracy to defraud. Gregory explained it over encrypted email. If we can show she was planning to divorce you specifically to profit from the Singapore deal, and that Marcus was complicit in both the affair and the financial conspiracy, we can make a case for fraud. The prenup might not protect her, and Marcus could face criminal charges for fiduciary breach. Damon read the message 3 times. Then he scheduled an early return from his Singapore trip. Time to spring the trap. Damon landed at JFK at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, 24 hours earlier than his public schedule showed. He'd told Celeste and Marcus he'd be in Singapore until Saturday, closing the final details personally. You both hold down the fort, he'd said in their last video conference, his face perfectly calm. I'll be back with good news. Celeste had blown him a kiss through the screen. Marcus had looked relieved. Neither of them knew that Damon had closed the Singapore deal 2 days earlier via secure video conference from a hotel room in Tokyo. The early return was a test, and they'd failed before he'd even walked through the door. The driver dropped him 3 blocks from the penthouse. Damon walked the rest of the way, his $3,000 shoes silent on the rain-slick pavement. Manhattan at midnight was alive with sirens and taxi horns, but he felt completely alone. A ghost haunting his own life. He used the service entrance to avoid the doorman. He'd texted ahead to arrange it. The freight elevator smelled like cleaning supplies and other people's groceries. Damon watched the floor numbers climb and felt nothing. That was the strangest part. He'd expected rage, heartbreak, something volcanic. Instead, he felt like a surgeon approaching a necessary amputation. Cold. Focused. Ready. The penthouse was dark except for a line of light under the bedroom door. Damon stood in the hallway and listened. Laughter. Celeste's voice, breathy and intimate. He texted from Singapore. Said he's exhausted. He won't even call tonight. Marcus's deeper rumble. 3 more weeks and we're free. Monaco is waiting. The sound of sheets moving. A sigh. Damon's hand closed around the door handle. He counted to 3, the way he used to before stepping on stage for investor pitches when he had everything to lose. 1, 2, 3. He pushed the door open. The scene was exactly what Elena's reports had prepared him for, but somehow worse. His wife. His best friend. His bed. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Celeste's eyes widened, not with shame, but with calculation. She was already working angles, already planning her next move. Marcus grabbed for his pants, his face gone white. Damon cataloged every detail with the same mind that had memorized code and market trends and competitor weaknesses. He would remember this forever. Damon, Celeste started, her voice steady despite being naked in another man's arms. This isn't what you think. The lie was so casual it almost impressed him. Almost. How long? He asked, his voice terrifyingly calm. He watched her decide whether to keep lying or shift tactics. She chose arrogance. Does it matter? She reached for her robe, lazy and entitled, like he was interrupting her schedule. 2 years, she finally admitted. Maybe 3. You were always too busy building your little empire to notice. Little empire. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Damon felt the last thread of whatever they'd been snapped cleanly. Get out, he said quietly. Both of you. Now. And that's when Celeste made her final mistake. She laughed. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Damon sat in Gregory Chen's office, watching his attorney arrange documents like a chess grandmaster. She has no idea what's coming, Gregory said. The surveillance footage alone would bury her. But combined with the financial conspiracy, this isn't just divorce. This is a masterclass in consequences. Damon stared at Manhattan's skyline. Somewhere out there, Celeste was calling divorce attorneys, thinking she held all the cards. She was wrong. The first blow landed at 10 a.m. Gregory's servers found Celeste at her favorite Tribeca cafe. The envelope landed like a bomb. Divorce petition citing adultery and conspiracy to defraud. Asset freeze. Emergency restraining order. And the crown jewel, a detailed affair timeline with hotel receipts, texts, and photographs. The second blow was surgical. At 10:15 a.m., Damon called an emergency board meeting. Marcus arrived thinking it was about Singapore, wearing his power tie. Damon walked in flanked by legal and security. "We need to discuss a personnel matter," he said pleasantly. Marcus looked confused until security played audio recordings. Marcus's voice crystal clear. "Once he's distracted with Singapore, we move. You file. I'll liquidate my options and disappear the money offshore." The board sat in stunned silence. Marcus went pale, stammering excuses. "I can explain," Damon cut him off. "Explain to the SEC. You're terminated for cause. Security will escort you out. The police are waiting downstairs." Marcus's face crumbled. "Damon, please. We were friends." Damon's smile was arctic. "Friends don't betray each other. Predators do." By noon, tech blogs ran headlines. Corelink CFO terminated amid fraud investigation. Damon ignored the explosion of messages from CEOs and journalists. At 2 p.m., he arrived home to find locks changed and Celeste's belongings being boxed. The prenuptial agreement she'd signed when Corelink was just an idea was ironclad. But Gregory had found the loophole. Fraud nullified everything. Celeste was entitled to nothing. She waited in the lobby, eyes red, spine straight. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I gave you 8 years." Damon studied this stranger wearing his wife's face. "No, you took 8 years of mine. There's a difference." He handed her a folder containing every piece of evidence. "My attorneys will send a settlement offer," he said quietly. "You'll receive exactly what you brought to this marriage, nothing. Contest it, and I'll release everything publicly. You'll be the woman who tried to rob her self-made husband." That's the narrative. Celeste's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Photos of her and Marcus at hotels. Text messages planning Monaco. Conversations with divorce lawyers calculating her take from the Singapore deal. Her face went white. "You've been watching us?" she whispered. Damon's expression didn't change. "I've been protecting myself. You should have remembered who you were dealing with. I didn't build a billion-dollar company by missing details." She tried one last card. "The media will destroy you. Billionaire surveillance on his wife? You'll look paranoid, controlling." Damon almost laughed. "Try it. See which story they run with suspicious CEO protecting his assets or gold digger caught planning to rob her husband with his CFO. You taught me something valuable, Celeste. Love makes you blind. But betrayal? That brings perfect clarity." He walked past her toward the elevator. "You have 48 hours to vacate. After that, anything left becomes evidence in the criminal case against Marcus. Choose wisely." The elevator doors closed on her shocked face. Damon felt nothing. The woman he'd loved was already gone. This was just paperwork. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Celeste hired a high-profile attorney who specialized in wronged wives, trying to spin the story in her favor. She gave an interview to a gossip website claiming Damon had been emotionally absent and she'd sought comfort elsewhere. The article painted her as a neglected artist crushed by her husband's ambition. Social media picked it up. For 48 hours, Damon was the villain. Then Gregory released the hotel receipts. 16 different hotels. 2 years of documented cheating. Text messages planning to disappear the money offshore. The narrative collapsed like a sandcastle in a hurricane. Marcus fared worse. The SEC investigation uncovered that he'd been positioning himself to liquidate stock options the moment the Singapore deal closed. A clear violation of insider trading regulations and fiduciary duty. Federal prosecutors got involved. The man who'd been Damon's CFO, his Stanford roommate, his trusted friend, was facing 15 years in federal prison. Damon watched the news coverage from his office and felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not sadness. Just a cold recognition that justice sometimes looks like destruction. Marcus tried to call him once, from a blocked number. Damon let it go to voicemail. He never listened to the message. The hardest part was the nights. The penthouse felt like a museum now, beautiful, expensive, and completely dead. Damon would stand at the windows watching the city breathe and wonder if this was what winning felt like. He'd protected his company, his wealth, his reputation. He'd punished the people who'd betrayed him. But the victories tasted like ashes. He was 32 years old, worth billions, and profoundly alone. Sometimes he'd remember Brooklyn, the cramped apartment, the fire escape conversations, Celeste painting while he coded. Had any of it been real? Or had he just been useful to her? A bet she'd made that paid off until she found a faster route to wealth? One evening, Elena Voss stopped by with her final report. "This is everything," she said, sliding a thick folder across his desk. "Every piece of evidence, every timeline, every photograph. It's over, Mr. Ashford. You won." Damon looked at the folder and felt sick. "Did I?" he asked. Elena tilted her head, studying him. "You exposed the truth. You protected yourself. Most people never get that chance. They just suffer and wonder." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, she never deserved you. And somewhere out there is someone who will see that. Don't let this break you." After she left, Damon opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out the one thing he'd saved from Brooklyn. A small canvas, maybe 6 inches square, that Celeste had painted of him in those early days. He was hunched over his laptop, illuminated by screen glow, completely absorbed in his work. She'd captured something in the painting, his intensity, his hope, the man he'd been before money and betrayal and billion-dollar deals. Damon stared at it for a long time. Then he put it back in the drawer and closed it. That man was gone. He'd had to kill him to survive. The question was, who was left in his place? The divorce hearing was held in a gray Manhattan courtroom that smelled like old wood and broken promises. Celeste sat across the aisle with her attorney, a woman named Diane Rothschild, who wore Armani suits and a reputation for extracting maximum settlements. Celeste looked smaller than Damon remembered, her designer dress hanging a bit loose, her makeup unable to hide the hollows under her eyes. For a brief moment, he felt something almost like pity. Then he remembered the laughter in his bedroom, the Monaco plan, the casual cruelty of your little empire. The pity evaporated like morning fog. Judge Patricia Morrison was 60-something, steel-haired, and famously impatient with theatrics. She reviewed the case files with reading glasses perched on her nose, occasionally making notes. When she finally looked up, her expression gave nothing away. "This is quite a collection of evidence, Mr. Chin," she said to Gregory. "Mrs. Ashford, your client knowingly engaged in a lengthy extramarital affair while simultaneously planning to divorce her husband specifically to capitalize on a major business transaction. Is that your position, Ms. Rothschild?" Diane stood, her voice smooth as silk. "Your Honor, my client was a devoted partner for 8 years. She supported Mr. Ashford when he had nothing. Did she also support him by sleeping with his CFO in hotels across Manhattan?" Judge Morrison interrupted. The courtroom went silent. Diane faltered. "Your Honor, the emotional complexity of marriage." The judge held up her hand. "Save it. I've reviewed the evidence. The timeline is damning. The financial conspiracy is clear. The prenuptial agreement stands, and given the fraud involved, Mrs. Ashford's claims are denied in full. She will receive her personal belongings and nothing more. Additionally, I'm ordering her to pay Mr. Ashford's legal fees." Celeste gasped audibly. Diane looked like she'd been slapped. Gregory didn't even smile. He'd known this was coming. Celeste stood suddenly, her voice cracking. "Damon, please. We can work this out. We don't need courts and lawyers. Remember Brooklyn? Remember who we were." Damon looked at her. Really looked, and saw desperation where arrogance used to live. "I remember," he said quietly. "I remember trusting you completely. I remember loving you more than my own ambition. And I remember you choosing money over me the second someone else offered." His voice stayed level, but the words landed like bullets. "You made your choice, Celeste. This is mine." Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "We're done here. Divorce granted. Court adjourned." In the hallway outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Microphones thrust forward. Gregory handled it smoothly. "Mr. Ashford is pleased with the court's decision and looks forward to moving on with his life." Damon said nothing, walking toward the exit with security clearing a path. Behind him, he could hear Celeste crying, Diane trying to spin the loss into something less devastating. He didn't look back. Outside, the November air was sharp and clean. Damon stood on the courthouse steps and realized he could breathe again. The weight he'd been carrying, the lies, the pretending, the performance of a marriage, was finally gone. Marcus's criminal trial was scheduled for next month. The SEC had built a case that would likely send him away for a decade. Celeste would have to sell her art collection to pay her legal bills. In a different version of this story, Damon might have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, he just felt tired. He'd won every battle, protected everything he'd built, and somehow still felt like he'd lost something essential. Gregory appeared beside him. There's still the question of Marcus's attempt to contact you. He's looking to make a deal with prosecutors. They want to interview you. Damon shook his head. Tell them I'll cooperate. But I don't want to see him. Ever again. 6 months later, Damon stood in CoreLink's executive conference room overlooking Central Park. The Singapore deal had closed. Company valuation, $6 billion. By every metric that mattered to Wall Street, he'd won. But the man in the glass reflection looked older, carved by experience and loss. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I know you won't forgive me, but those early years were real. I did love you. I just loved money more. I'm sorry. See, Damon read it twice, then deleted it. Some apologies arrived too late. Some bridges should stay ash. Elena had been right. Someone would see him for who he really was. Dr. Amara Okonkwo ran a nonprofit teaching coding to underprivileged kids in the Bronx. They'd met at a tech summit where she'd challenged him about CoreLink's lack of community outreach. Instead of being annoyed, he'd been fascinated. She was brilliant, sharp, and completely unimpressed by his billions. They got coffee, then dinner. She knew his whole story, the betrayal, the divorce, the headlines. Her response was simple. Your ex-wife showed you who she was. Now show yourself who you can become. Damon had launched a new CoreLink initiative. Free security services for nonprofits and small businesses. $50 million in annual foregone revenue. The board pushed back until he reminded them who held controlling interest. We built this to solve problems, not just make money, he'd said. It felt like returning to Brooklyn, to the reason he'd started coding, believing technology could help people, could change things. Amara was waiting at a small Ethiopian restaurant when he finally left the office, her smile genuine and warm. Billionaire boy, she teased. How many empires today? He laughed. Only 3. Slowing down. Walking her home through Harlem, his phone buzzed. Marcus Thorne sentenced to 12 years federal prison. Damon read it once and put the phone away. The revenge he'd planned had come to fruition. Justice served. But standing on this street corner with a woman who challenged him to be better, not just richer, he realized the real victory wasn't destroying his enemies. It was building a life they couldn't touch. You okay? Amara asked. He took her calloused hand. Yeah, he said honestly. For the first time in years, I actually am. Marcus got 12 years. Celeste lost everything. And Damon? He found purpose. 2 years after the divorce, Damon sold the Manhattan penthouse and used the money to endow a scholarship fund for underprivileged students pursuing tech. Named after his father, who'd wanted him to be a doctor, but never saw him become someone who used success to lift others. Standing in his Brooklyn brownstone watching Amara paint while neighborhood kids played outside, Damon understood. The shocking revenge wasn't what he'd done to Celeste and Marcus. It was this: he'd survived them, thrived despite them, become someone they could never touch. Not through wealth or power, but by learning the difference between winning and being happy. The doorbell rang. Sunday coding class. Damon smiled and went to let them in. Damon got his revenge, but more importantly, he got his life back. Celeste and Marcus lost everything, while Damon found something money can't buy: real love and purpose. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, did Damon go too far with his revenge, or did they deserve everything they got? Would you have done the same thing in his position? Team Damon or Team Celeste? Just kidding, there's no Team Celeste here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Remember, love smart, trust carefully, and never underestimate someone who built an empire from nothing.